In a quiet American town, Rebecca, a compassionate veterinarian, rescues Jake, a German shepherd abandoned in the snow. Near death, Jake's journey begins with Rebecca's unwavering care. Through weeks of physical healing and emotional rehabilitation, Jake learns to trust again. When Jake runs away after being startled by a loud noise, Rebecca's desperate search unites the town, turning skepticism into support. After being found, Jake's recovery becomes a symbol of hope for the community. Rebecca organizes a heartfelt event, Jake's Second Chance Day, to share his story and inspire compassion for all animals in need. Jake's journey transforms Willow Creek, leading to new initiatives for animal rescue and fostering a culture of kindness. Jake's legacy endures long after his passing, teaching everyone the power of second chances and unconditional love. What do you think of Jake's incredible story of survival and transformation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Where are you watching from? Let us know. Don't forget to subscribe to DG Story for more inspiring tales like this one. Like, comment, share, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Together, let's spread hope and compassion one story at a time. The sun rose over the quiet little town of Willow Creek, where rolling hills met dense forests. In a cozy suburban home, Jake, a German shepherd with a glossy coat and warm amber eyes, stretched lazily on the porch. His favorite human, 10-year-old Tim Martin, dashed outside holding a frisbee. "Come on, Jake," Tim called, and Jake sprang to life, his tail wagging furiously. The Martin family was Jake's world. Tim was his best friend, and Mrs. Martin was always quick with a kind word and a treat. Life was perfect until the day it all changed. One evening, as Jake lay by the fireplace, he sensed a shift in the household. Boxes piled high in the living room, and the normally cheerful family seemed subdued. "Jake, buddy," Mr. Martin said, kneeling beside him. "We're moving to the city. It's going to be different there. No yard, no space. We can't take you with us." Tim overheard, his eyes filling with tears. "We can't leave Jake," he cried. But his parents' decision was firm. The next morning, they loaded their belongings into a moving truck, and with heavy hearts, they drove Jake to the outskirts of town. Mr. Martin parked near the edge of a forested area. "I'm sorry, boy," he whispered, placing a small bag of food nearby. "You're a strong dog. You'll figure it out." Jake watched as the car drove away, disappearing down the road. He barked once, then again, running a few steps after them before stopping. The realization sank in: he was alone. Jake's first days as a stray were confusing and difficult. He wandered through unfamiliar neighborhoods, dodging cars and scavenging for food. Occasionally, he'd approach humans, wagging his tail hopefully, but most shooed him away. As days turned to weeks, Jake's glossy coat became matted with dirt, and his ribs began to show. Winter arrived, bringing biting winds and icy streets. Jake found brief shelter under porches or in alleys, but the cold seeped into his bones. One night, a blizzard swept through Willow Creek. Jake, now weak and exhausted, stumbled into a dark alley behind a diner. He collapsed beside a stack of boxes, his body trembling from the cold. Snow piled up around him, and his breath came in shallow gasps. For the first time, Jake felt like giving up. The next morning, Rebecca, a young veterinarian who had recently returned to Willow Creek, walked through the alley on her way to work. She spotted a motionless figure half buried in the snow. "Oh no," she murmured, kneeling beside Jake. His fur was damp with melting snow, and his breathing was faint. "You're not done yet," she said softly, wrapping him in her coat. "Let's get you out of here." Rebecca carried Jake to her truck and rushed him to the small animal clinic she had just opened in town. As she placed him on the examination table, her heart ached at the sight of his emaciated body and frostbitten paws. "Hang in there, big guy," she whispered, stroking his head. "We're going to get you through this." Jake's condition was critical, and Rebecca knew the road ahead would be difficult. Some of her colleagues questioned her decision to devote so much time and resources to a stray dog. "Rebecca, he's in rough shape." One assistant said hesitantly, "Are you sure it's worth it?" "It's not about worth," Rebecca replied firmly. "Every life matters, and I'm not giving up on him." She named him Jake, not knowing his original name but wanting to give him an identity, a reminder that he was more than just another stray. At the Willow Creek Animal Clinic, Rebecca worked tirelessly to stabilize Jake's condition. His frostbitten paws were cleaned and bandaged, and an IV drip provided much-needed fluids. But his condition was precarious. Jake was severely underweight, and his breathing remained shallow. Rebecca stayed by his side through the night, whispering words of encouragement. "You're not alone anymore, Jake. Just hang in there." By morning, Jake's breathing had steadied, but he still lay motionless. Rebecca snapped a photo of him and posted it on the clinic's social media page, asking for support. "Meet Jake," she wrote. "He was left to fend for himself in the cold, but we're not giving up on him. Help us give Jake the second chance he deserves." Not everyone at the clinic shared Rebecca's optimism. "Rebecca, I know you have a big heart," said Karen, a senior vet at the clinic. "But this is a small-town practice. Our resources are limited, and Jake's chances aren't great. What if this takes time and money away from other animals we could save?" Rebecca's jaw tightened. Jake's life is just as valuable as any other. If there's even a chance we can save him, it's worth trying. Karen sighed but didn't push further. Others in the clinic, however, began murmuring doubts. Some questioned Rebecca's judgment, while others saw Jake as a lost cause. Rebecca felt the pressure mounting, but she refused to give in. "I'll cover the costs myself if I have to," she told Karen. "But I'm not giving up on him." Over the next few days, Jake showed slight signs of improvement. He began eating small portions of food and responding faintly to Rebecca's voice. Still, his progress was slow, and he often cowered when anyone approached too quickly. One evening, as Rebecca sat beside his kennel, Jake hesitantly lifted his head and rested it on her lap. Rebecca froze, her heart swelling with hope. "You're stronger than they think, aren't you?" she whispered, gently stroking his head. It was a small gesture, but it was enough to reaffirm her commitment. As news of Jake spread through Willow Creek, not everyone shared Rebecca's enthusiasm for his recovery. Some townsfolk saw her efforts as unnecessary or even foolish. At the local diner, a small group of regulars debated Jake's story. "I don't understand why she's wasting time on a stray," muttered Hank, a middle-aged farmer. "There are plenty of healthy animals out there that could use help. It's her clinic." "Hank," said Mary, the waitress, as she refilled his coffee, "and she's trying to make a difference. That dog didn't ask to be abandoned." Hank shook his head. "It's not about her intentions. It's about priorities. Small-town vets don't have the luxury to play hero." The conversation reflected a growing tension in the town. While some admired Rebecca's compassion, others questioned the practicality of her actions. Back at the clinic, Rebecca faced a different challenge: Jake's emotional scars. While his physical condition was slowly improving, his behavior suggested deep psychological wounds. Jake flinched at loud noises and avoided eye contact with anyone but Rebecca. On one occasion, when a staff member entered his kennel too abruptly, Jake retreated into a corner. Trembling, Rebecca realized that Jake wasn't just recovering from physical neglect, he was also relearning how to trust. "Take it slow," Rebecca instructed her staff. "Let him approach you on his own terms." She spent hours sitting quietly by Jake's kennel, reading aloud or simply being present. Over time, Jake began to relax in her company. He would watch her intently, his tail twitching slightly whenever she spoke. One afternoon, Rebecca overheard a heated conversation at the clinic's front desk. "Is it true you're spending clinic funds on that stray?" a woman demanded. Rebecca stepped in before her receptionist could respond. "Yes, it's true," she said calmly, "but I'm covering most of the costs myself." The woman frowned. There are other animals that need help. Ones with real owners. You can't save them all. Rebecca's voice remained steady. I'm not trying to save them all. I'm trying to save Jake. He deserves that chance. Her response silenced the woman, but the encounter left Rebecca shaken. She knew not everyone understood her decision, but she refused to let doubt cloud her resolve. One chilly morning, Rebecca decided it was time to take Jake outside for a short walk in the clinic's enclosed yard. It had been weeks since he'd felt grass beneath his paws, and Rebecca hoped the fresh air would help his recovery. Come on, Jake, she said softly, holding the leash. Jake hesitated, his eyes darting nervously toward the open door. Rebecca crouched down, holding out a small treat. It's okay, boy, you're safe. After a long moment, Jake took a tentative step forward. His movements were cautious, his ears twitching at every sound. Rebecca walked slowly, giving him time to explore. When Jake paused to sniff a patch of grass, Rebecca felt a surge of hope. You're doing great, she said, her voice filled with encouragement. But their moment of peace was interrupted by a sudden loud noise, a delivery truck backfiring on the street nearby. Jake froze, his tail tucking tightly between his legs. Before Rebecca could react, he bolted toward the yard's fence, pulling against the leash. Jake, it's okay, Rebecca called, her heart racing. She knelt down, keeping her body still and her voice calm. You're safe, Jake. I've got you. Jake stopped at the fence. Trembling, slowly, Rebecca approached him, her hands steady as she clipped the leash back on. Let's go back inside, she whispered, gently guiding him. The incident shook Rebecca, but it also deepened her resolve. She realized that Jake's journey wouldn't just be about physical recovery. It would also be about rebuilding his trust in the world. That evening, she researched techniques for rehabilitating traumatized animals, reaching out to colleagues and online forums for advice. She also began working with a local dog trainer who specialized in rescue cases. This will take time, the trainer told her, but with patience and consistency, he can learn to feel safe again. Rebecca implemented daily routines to help Jake acclimate to new experiences. She introduced him to different sounds at low volumes, gradually increasing them as he became more comfortable. She also started using calming scents and toys to create positive associations with his surroundings. Over the next few weeks, Jake began to show signs of progress. He wagged his tail for the first time when Rebecca approached his kennel, and he started eating his meals without hesitation. One afternoon, as Rebecca sat on the clinic floor, Jake approached her unprompted. He nudged her hand with his nose, a clear gesture of trust. Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes as she stroked his head. You're getting there, Jake, she whispered. You're going to be okay. This moment, though small, was a turning point in Jake's recovery. It reaffirmed Rebecca's belief that Jake was worth every ounce of effort. Jake's progress brought a sense of hope to the clinic. He now walked on a leash without hesitation, and his once cautious demeanor had softened into trust. At least with Rebecca, the bond they had built was undeniable. But Rebecca knew this was only the beginning of his journey. One afternoon, Rebecca decided it was time to take Jake beyond the clinic's yard. She chose a quiet park on the outskirts of Willow Creek, where he could experience a more natural environment. As they strolled along a dirt path, Jake seemed to relish the new scents and open space. His ears perked up at the rustle of leaves, and his tail wagged slightly when a butterfly fluttered past. Rebecca couldn't help but smile. You're doing amazing, Jake, she said softly. But just as they rounded a bend, a sudden noise shattered the tranquility. A motorcycle roared down a nearby road, its engine growling loudly. Jake froze, his body stiffening as his tail tucked tightly between his legs. It's okay, Jake, Rebecca said, kneeling beside him. But before she could calm him, Jake bolted, yanking the leash from her grasp. Jake, wait, Rebecca called, panic rising in her chest as she watched him disappear into the woods. Rebecca wasted no time. She called the local animal rescue team and several friends to help search for Jake. Flyers were quickly printed and posted around town, and Rebecca spent hours driving through the area, calling his name. The people of Willow Creek responded with mixed reactions. Why is she going through so much trouble for a stray? One man at the diner remarked, "It's not just about the dog." Mary, the waitress, replied, "It's about what he means to her and to all of us. If Rebecca can fight for Jake, maybe we should too." Despite the community's initial skepticism, a handful of volunteers joined the search. Among them was Hank, the gruff farmer who had previously criticized Rebecca's efforts. "I don't get it," Hank muttered as they combed the woods. "But if anyone can bring that dog back, it's you." Rebecca was too focused on finding Jake to question Hank's change of heart. Meanwhile, Jake found himself deep in the woods, disoriented and frightened. The towering trees and unfamiliar sounds reminded him of the days when he was abandoned. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, and his injured paw throbbed with every step. As night fell, Jake huddled beneath a fallen log, shivering against the cold. His mind flashed to memories of Rebecca, her gentle voice, her warm touch. For the first time in weeks, Jake felt the pull of home, a place he hadn't thought he'd find again. As the news of Jake's disappearance spread, more townsfolk decided to join the search. Rebecca, now exhausted but determined, coordinated efforts from the clinic, using a map to mark areas they had already searched. Hank, the farmer who had once dismissed Jake's recovery, surprised everyone by stepping up. "Dogs aren't just animals, they're loyal. If I lost one of mine, I'd want people to care," he said gruffly, handing Rebecca a flashlight. This shift in attitude inspired others, and soon a group of volunteers armed with flashlights and whistles combed through the woods and fields surrounding Willow Creek. On the second day of the search, a young boy named Tyler, who had been searching with his parents, ran up to Rebecca holding something in his hands. "Miss Rebecca, I found this by the creek," he exclaimed. Rebecca's heart raced as she took the object, a piece of torn leash, muddy but unmistakable. "This is Jake's," she said, her voice trembling with hope. Tyler's mother placed a reassuring hand on Rebecca's shoulder. "He's out there, and we're going to find him." The discovery reignited everyone's determination. Rebecca called the search party together and redirected their efforts toward the creek, marking it as the most likely spot where Jake had passed through. Deeper in the woods, Jake was navigating unfamiliar terrain. His paw still ached, and his energy was waning. Despite his exhaustion, he kept moving, driven by an instinct to survive, and perhaps a flicker of hope to reunite with Rebecca. But the forest held its own dangers. As Jake sniffed cautiously at a bush, a low growl rumbled nearby. Emerging from the shadows was a coyote, his sharp eyes fixed on him. Jake froze, his instincts kicking in. Though larger than the coyote, Jake was weak and vulnerable. The coyote circled him slowly, testing his reaction. With a sudden burst of energy, Jake let out a bark and lunged forward, startling the coyote just enough to make it retreat. The encounter left Jake shaken, but it also reignited his will to fight. Rebecca, unaware of Jake's peril, pressed on through the forest, calling his name. Each passing hour felt heavier, but she refused to give up. As night fell again, one of the volunteers suggested calling it a day. "We've been at it for hours," he said. "Maybe we'll have better luck in the morning." Rebecca shook her head. "Jake is out there, alone and scared. I can't stop. Not until I bring him home." Her unwavering determination inspired the others to continue, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they ventured deeper into the woods. Jake wandered further into the forest, his body heavy with exhaustion but his instincts pushing him forward. The scent of the creek lingered faintly, guiding him as he limped through dense underbrush. Every step was a battle, his injured paw throbbed, and his hunger gnawed at him. He paused to drink from the creek, the icy water shocking but refreshing. As he rested by the bank, memories of Rebecca surfaced, her gentle voice calling his name. the warmth of her hand stroking his fur. Jake let out a soft whimper, the need to return to her becoming stronger than the fear of his surroundings. Meanwhile, Rebecca and her search party were combing the area near the creek where Jake's leash fragment had been found. They scanned the muddy banks for tracks or other signs of his presence. "Over here!" shouted Ben, a local carpenter who had joined the search. Rebecca rushed to his side, her heart pounding. Ben pointed to a faint trail of paw prints leading away from the creek. "These look fresh," he said. Rebecca's breath hitched. "That's him," she said with certainty. "He's heading deeper into the woods." The group pushed forward, their flashlights cutting through the growing darkness. Rebecca's voice grew hoarse from calling Jake's name, but she refused to stop. As night fell, Jake's strength waned. He found a small hollow beneath an uprooted tree and curled up, his body shivering from the cold. The weight of fatigue pressed heavily on him, but the thought of Rebecca kept him awake. Somewhere in the distance, he thought he heard her voice. It was faint, carried by the wind, but it stirred something deep within him. With a shaky effort, Jake stood and began to move again, following the sound. The forest grew quieter, save for the occasional rustle of leaves. Jake's pace slowed, but his resolve remained unbroken. Rebecca's group fanned out as they followed the trail, calling Jake's name into the night. Suddenly, Hank's flashlight caught a flash of movement ahead. "There!" he shouted. Rebecca turned, her heart leaping. She caught sight of Jake's silhouette, standing motionless among the trees, his head turned toward her, his eyes reflecting the beam of her flashlight. "Jake!" Rebecca cried, dropping to her knees. Jake hesitated for a moment, his body tense. Then, as if recognizing her voice, he bounded toward her, his tail wagging weakly. Rebecca opened her arms, and Jake collapsed into them, his body trembling but relieved. "I've got you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You're safe now." As Rebecca held Jake close, the search party gathered around, their flashlights casting warm circles of light on the forest floor. Hank, usually reserved, was the first to speak. "You found him," he said, his tone softer than Rebecca had ever heard. "I didn't think he'd make it this far. He's stronger than we gave him credit for," Rebecca replied, stroking Jake's matted fur. Jake, though exhausted, seemed to relax in her arms. His tail wagged faintly, a small but powerful sign of his trust in her. The group cheered quietly, their earlier doubts replaced by admiration for both Rebecca's determination and Jake's resilience. Carrying Jake back to the clinic was no small feat. Ben fashioned a makeshift stretcher from branches and a blanket, and the group took turns carrying him. Jake lay quietly, his amber eyes watching Rebecca as she walked beside him. The trek back was slow but steady, and by the time they reached Willow Creek, dawn was breaking. The streets were quiet, but a few curious onlookers peeked out from their windows, surprised to see such a large group returning together. At the clinic, Rebecca gently placed Jake on the examination table. She worked quickly to clean his wounds and check for new injuries. "You're safe now," she whispered, her voice filled with relief. Word of Jake's rescue spread through Willow Creek, and the community began to see Rebecca's efforts in a new light. The local diner became a hub of conversation, with patrons praising her determination. "I used to think she was wasting her time," Hank admitted over coffee one morning. "But after seeing what she went through to find that dog, I've got nothing but respect for her." Mary, the waitress, smiled knowingly. "Sometimes it takes a little faith to see what's worth fighting for." Even those who had been skeptical began visiting the clinic, offering donations or volunteering their time. Rebecca's dedication had not only saved Jake, but also inspired a shift in how the town viewed animal rescue. Over the following weeks, Jake made a remarkable recovery. Though still skittish around loud noises, he grew more confident each day. He followed Rebecca around the clinic, his tail wagging whenever she called his name. One afternoon, as Rebecca sat on the porch of the clinic, Jake rested his head on her lap. She scratched behind his ears, smiling. You've come a long way, Jake, she said softly. I'm proud of you. Jake let out a contented sigh, as if understanding her words. The search for Jake had united the town in a way Rebecca hadn't anticipated. Neighbors who rarely spoke to one another had come together for a common cause, and the experience left a lasting impression. Hank, once one of Rebecca's harshest critics, even began advocating for animal rescue efforts. If a dog like Jake can find his way back, maybe there's hope for all of us, he said with a chuckle. As Jake's recovery progressed, Rebecca began thinking about the larger impact of his story. His journey wasn't just about survival, it was about the power of second chances and the importance of compassion. She realized that his story could inspire others to take action for animals in need. One evening, as Rebecca sat on the porch with Jake by her side, she shared her thoughts with Ben, who had stopped by with some tools for clinic repairs. What if we held an event? Rebecca said, scratching Jake behind the ears. We could tell Jake's story, invite people to the clinic, and raise awareness about animal rescue. Ben nodded thoughtfully. It's a great idea. You've already brought the town together with the search for Jake. This could take it even further. Rebecca's excitement grew. We could turn it into a community day, games for kids, adoption opportunities, and maybe even a fundraiser for the clinic. Ben grinned. Count me in. I'll build whatever you need. Rebecca wasted no time putting her plan into action. She reached out to volunteers, local businesses, and animal shelters in the surrounding areas. Posters were printed and displayed in every shop window in Willow Creek, inviting residents to Jake's Second Chance Day at the town park. The event would feature a short presentation about Jake's journey, booths from rescue organizations, and activities like petting areas, face painting, and even a doggy parade. Local vendors donated food and supplies, while others offered to help with logistics. Despite the overwhelming support, there were still skeptics. Hank, though he had grown to respect Rebecca's efforts, remained cautious. You're putting a lot of faith in people showing up, he said one afternoon while helping set up tents in the park. Rebecca smiled, her confidence unwavering. They showed up for Jake when it mattered most. I believe they'll come again. As the event approached, Rebecca focused on preparing Jake for his big day. Though he had come a long way, she wanted to make sure he felt comfortable around the crowds. She introduced him to small groups of people at the clinic, rewarding him with treats and gentle praise for staying calm. To her delight, Jake responded well, his tail wagging more frequently as he grew accustomed to the attention. You're going to steal the show, buddy, Rebecca said one evening. Kneeling beside him, Jake nuzzled her hand, as if to say he understood. The night before the event, Rebecca sat alone in the park, gazing at the setup. String lights hung from the trees, and colorful banners flapped gently in the breeze. The sight filled her with both excitement and nerves. This has to work, she murmured, looking down at Jake, who rested his head on her lap. Not just for us, but for every animal like you who deserves a second chance. Jake let out a soft whine, and Rebecca smiled, her resolve strengthened. Saturday dawned bright and clear, the perfect day for Jake's Second Chance Day. Rebecca arrived at the park early, her heart pounding with both excitement and nerves. Volunteers were already bustling around, setting up booths and arranging decorations. The centerpiece of the event was a small stage with a banner that read, "Every life deserves a second chance, Jake's journey." Behind the stage was a photo display of Jake's transformation. From the frail dog found in the snow to the healthy, vibrant companion he was now. Jake, wearing a light blue bandana embroidered with the words, "Second Chance Hero," sat calmly beside Rebecca. She stroked his fur, whispering, "You're going to do great, buddy." As the morning unfolded, a few families trickled into the park. Children ran toward the petting area, while parents browsed the booths set up by local rescue organizations. Despite the promising start, Rebecca couldn't help but notice the absence of familiar faces from the town. Ben approached her, a clipboard in hand. "It's still early," he said reassuringly. People will come. Rebecca nodded. Though her stomach churned with worry, she had poured her heart into this event. And the thought of it failing was hard to bear. Just as Rebecca began to doubt herself, she spotted Hank entering the park. The sight of the gruff farmer was enough to lift her spirits. Hank approached with a reluctant nod. "Figured I'd see what all the fuss is about," he said, gesturing to the setup. Rebecca smiled. "I'm glad you came." Hank glanced at Jake, who wagged his tail in response. "The dog looks good," he admitted. "You've done a fine job with him." By midday, the park began to fill with people, families, students, and even some of the skeptics Rebecca had faced earlier in her journey wandered in. Drawn by the festive atmosphere, Mary, the waitress from the diner, arrived with her grandchildren, while Tyler, the boy who had found Jake's leash, eagerly ran up to the photo display. "That's him," he exclaimed, pointing to Jake. Rebecca's heart swelled as she watched the community come together. For the first time, she felt like the town was truly united in understanding the importance of her mission. As the afternoon wore on, Rebecca prepared for her presentation. She had written and rewritten her speech countless times, wanting to convey not just Jake's story, but also the broader message of hope and compassion. Jake rested at her feet, his calm demeanor a testament to how far they had come. "You're my inspiration," Rebecca said softly, kneeling to adjust his bandana. The crowd began gathering near the stage, their anticipation palpable. Rebecca took a deep breath, ready to share their journey. Rebecca stood on the small stage, the weight of the crowd's attention settling over her. She glanced down at Jake, who sat patiently by her side, his bandana catching the sunlight. Taking a deep breath, she began. "Thank you all for being here today," Rebecca said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "When I found Jake, he was lying in the snow, alone and barely alive. At that moment, he needed more than just shelter. He needed someone to believe in him." She gestured to the photo display behind her, showing Jake's frail body when she first rescued him. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jake's journey wasn't just about survival, she continued. It was about trust, resilience, and the power of second chances. And it wasn't just Jake who changed, it was me too. He taught me that no matter how broken someone seems, they are worth fighting for. The crowd grew quiet, their focus entirely on Rebecca's words. Rebecca paused, letting her message sink in. "But Jake's story isn't unique," she said. "Every year, thousands of animals are abandoned, left to fend for themselves. Many don't get the second chance Jake did. That's why we're here today, to raise awareness and make a difference together." She stepped aside to reveal a slideshow of local rescue animals currently in need of homes. "These are just a few of the animals waiting for their second chance. I hope Jake's story inspires you to help them, whether by adopting, volunteering, or simply spreading the word." As Rebecca wrapped up her speech, Jake stood up and nudged her hand with his nose. The crowd chuckled softly, and Rebecca smiled. "Jake wants to say hi," she said, kneeling to his level. "He's the real star of today's event." Jake walked to the edge of the stage, his tail wagging as he looked out at the crowd. Rebecca handed him a treat, which he took gracefully before sitting beside her again. The audience clapped and cheered, moved by Jake's calm and trusting demeanor. As the applause died down, Rebecca noticed a few skeptical faces in the crowd. Hank, standing near the back, folded his arms and shook his head slightly. She approached him after stepping down from the stage. "What did you think?" she asked, her tone hopeful. Hank sighed. "It's a good story, Rebecca, but not everyone has the time or resources to do what you did." "That's just the truth," Rebecca nodded, understanding his perspective. "You're right. It's not always easy, but even small actions can make a big difference. If everyone does a little, it adds up to something meaningful." As Rebecca turned to rejoin the crowd, Mary approached with a smile. "You've got a way with words," she said. "I've been thinking about volunteering at the clinic. Maybe I can help the next Jake." Rebecca's heart lifted. "We'd love to have you, Mary." "Thank you," After Rebecca's speech, the park buzzed with activity. Families crowded around the rescue booths, asking about adoption procedures and ways to volunteer. Kids laughed as they painted animal-themed designs on their faces, and local vendors handed out snacks to cheerful attendees. Rebecca walked through the park, Jake trotting beside her, greeting anyone who reached out to pet him. For many, this was their first close interaction with a rescue dog, and Jake's gentle nature left a strong impression. "You'd never know he went through so much," a young woman said, crouching to scratch behind Jake's ears. "He's come a long way," Rebecca replied, her voice filled with pride. "And he's proof that every animal deserves a chance to heal." Hank stood near the edge of the park, his usual skeptical demeanor softening as he watched the community come together. He noticed neighbors who hadn't spoken in years chatting over coffee, sharing stories about their pets. Ben approached him, clapping him on the shoulder. "Still think it's a waste of time?" Hank sighed, his gaze fixed on Jake. "Maybe not," he admitted gruffly. "That dog's got something special. Makes you think twice, doesn't it?" Ben grinned. "That's the point. If Jake can change how people see things, imagine what the rest of us can do." As the event continued, a commotion near the petting area drew Rebecca's attention. She hurried over to find a small child crying, his balloon tangled in the branches of a tree. Jake, sensing the child's distress, approached cautiously. Rebecca knelt beside him, whispering, "It's okay, boy, let's help him." With Rebecca guiding him, Jake gently nuzzled the boy's hand, distracting him from his tears. The child giggled, his fear melting away as he petted Jake's soft fur. The crowd watched the interaction unfold, their hearts warming at Jake's natural ability to comfort. "That's one special dog," someone murmured, and others nodded in agreement. As the boys' laughter filled the air, Jake did something unexpected. He stood, walked toward the stage, and hopped onto it with surprising grace. Turning to face the crowd, he Saturday his posture calm and regal, as if to say, "I'm here, and I'm part of this." The audience erupted in applause, moved by Jake's unplanned yet symbolic gesture. Rebecca wiped a tear from her cheek, feeling an overwhelming sense of pride. "Jake doesn't need words to tell his story," she said, addressing the crowd once more. "He's living proof of the power of love and second chances." By the time the event wrapped up, the park was filled with renewed energy. Several animals from the adoption booths had found new homes, and Rebecca received numerous offers to volunteer at the clinic. Even Hank approached her before leaving. "You've got something good here," he said, tipping his hat. "Keep it up." Rebecca smiled. "Thanks, Hank. That means a lot." As the sun began to set, the park buzzed with stories of the day's events. Families carried newly adopted pets home. Children clutched their painted faces with joy, and the booths packed up, their volunteers energized by the success of the event. Rebecca stood near the stage, Jake resting calmly at her feet. Mary, the waitress, approached with a broad smile. "You know, I never thought one dog could do all this," she said, gesturing to the crowd. "It wasn't just Jake," Rebecca replied, stroking his fur. "It was all of us. He just gave us a reason to try." In the days following the event, stories about Jake's second chance day spread throughout Willow Creek and even reached neighboring towns. Local newspapers ran headlines like, "One Dog's Journey Unites a Community," and "How Jake Inspired Willow Creek to Care." Rebecca's clinic received an outpouring of support, donations, offers to foster animals, and heartfelt letters from people inspired by Jake's story. Even schools in the area began inviting Rebecca to speak, using Jake as a symbol of compassion and resilience. One morning, Rebecca was surprised to see Hank waiting outside the clinic. In his truck sat a small, scruffy dog with matted fur. "He showed up on my property," Hank said, scratching the back of his neck. "Figured he deserves a chance." "Too." Rebecca smiled warmly. "You're doing the right thing, Hank." Hank nodded. Maybe Jake was onto something. Sometimes, it's not just about the animals. It's about us. Inspired by the event, Willow Creek began implementing new initiatives to support animal welfare. A rescue fund was established to help cover medical costs for stray animals, and the local government partnered with Rebecca's clinic to host regular adoption drives. Jake, now a town favorite, often accompanied Rebecca to these events. His calm demeanor and gentle spirit continued to draw people in, reminding them of the transformative power of love and second chances. One evening, after a long day at the clinic, Rebecca and Jake sat on the porch, watching the stars. Jake rested his head on her lap, his tail wagging softly in the cool night air. "You've changed so much," Rebecca said, her voice filled with gratitude. "And you've changed me, too." Jake looked up at her, his eyes reflecting the trust and love they had built together. Rebecca thought back to the moment she found Jake in the snow, frail, frightened, and alone. Now, he was a symbol of hope, not just for her, but for an entire community. As she looked out at the quiet streets of Willow Creek, Rebecca knew that Jake's story would continue to inspire long after the last booth from the event had been packed away. And for Jake, life had come full circle, from abandonment to belonging, from fear to love. The weeks after Jake's second chance day felt like a dream for Rebecca. Her small clinic had transformed into a bustling hub of hope and action. Volunteers now filled the halls. Animals were finding homes faster than ever, and donations poured in to support the clinic's mission. Through it all, Jake remained her steadfast companion. Every day, he greeted visitors at the door, wagging his tail and offering his calm, reassuring presence. Children adored him, adults were inspired by him, and Rebecca couldn't imagine life without him. One evening, as Rebecca closed the clinic, she glanced at Jake, who was resting by the front desk. "You've been through so much," she said softly, "but you never gave up. You're a reminder of everything we're fighting for." Jake tilted his head as if understanding every word. Jake's story began spreading beyond Willow Creek. Animal welfare organizations shared his journey online, with posts and videos reaching people across the country. Comments poured in, with viewers moved by his resilience and Rebecca's unwavering dedication. Jake is proof that love and compassion can change the world. One commenter wrote, "Rebecca was invited to speak at conferences and events, where she shared not only Jake's story but also the lessons she had learned about patience, trust, and the importance of community. Jake taught me that no act of kindness is too small," she told an audience at a nearby town. "Every life deserves a chance, and sometimes, all it takes is one person to believe in that." One afternoon, Rebecca was surprised when Hank walked into the clinic with the scruffy dog he had rescued weeks earlier. The dog, now named Rusty, looked healthier and happier, his coat shining and his tail wagging. "You've done wonders with him," Rebecca said, beaming. Hank shrugged, though a small smile tugged at his lips. "Guess he's grown on me. Rusty's part of the family now." Hank had become one of the clinic's strongest supporters, often bringing supplies or helping with repairs. His transformation mirrored the changes happening across Willow Creek. A town once indifferent to animal welfare now embraced it wholeheartedly. Despite Jake's remarkable progress, Rebecca occasionally wondered if he had truly moved past his fears. The sound of loud engines or sudden noises still startled him, though he no longer bolted in fear. One day, as Rebecca walked Jake through the park, a motorcycle roared by. Jake froze, his ears flattening. Rebecca knelt beside him, her voice calm and steady. "You're safe, Jake," she said. "I'm right here." Jake looked at her, his body trembling for a moment before he took a cautious step forward. Rebecca's heart swelled with pride. It wasn't just a step, it was a victory. Rebecca and Jake's routine settled into a peaceful rhythm. Every morning, they walked through the woods behind the clinic, Jake trotting confidently by her side. In the evenings, they sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The clinic continued to thrive, with new faces joining the team and more animals finding homes. Jake remained the heart of it all, a constant reminder of what compassion could achieve. One day, Rebecca received a letter from Tim Martin, Jake's original owner. He had seen a news story about Jake and wanted to thank her for saving him. "Jake was my best friend." The letter read, "I never forgave myself for leaving him, but knowing he's happy now means the world to me. Thank you for giving him the life he deserves." Rebecca wiped away a tear, her heart heavy yet full. She placed the letter in a drawer, a keepsake of Jake's extraordinary journey. Years passed, but Jake's story continued to inspire. Willow Creek became known as a model for small-town animal rescue efforts, and Rebecca's clinic expanded to include a larger facility and outdoor space for rehabilitation. Jake, now older and grayer, remained Rebecca's loyal companion. His energy had slowed, but his spirit was as strong as ever. One quiet evening, as they sat together on the porch, Rebecca looked at Jake and said, "You've done so much, Jake. You've changed lives, including mine." Jake rested his head on her lap, his tail thumping softly against the wooden floor. On a particularly beautiful spring morning, Rebecca and Jake took their usual walk through the woods. The birds chirped overhead, and the sun filtered through the trees, casting golden light on the path. Jake moved slower now, but his steps were steady. Rebecca watched him closely, marveling at his resilience and the quiet strength he carried. As they reached the clearing where they often stopped to rest, Rebecca sat on the grass, and Jake lay beside her. They stayed there for hours, enjoying the peace and the bond that had brought them both so far. Jake passed away a few months later, peacefully in his sleep. Though Rebecca's heart broke, she found comfort in knowing he had lived a life filled with love, joy, and purpose. The community of Willow Creek came together to honor Jake's memory, planting a tree in the park where the event had been held. Beneath it, a plaque read, "In memory of Jake, a second chance hero who taught us all to believe in love." Rebecca continued her work, driven by the legacy Jake had left behind. Every animal she saved, every life she touched, was a tribute to him. And though Jake was gone, his spirit lived on in the hearts of everyone he had inspired.